Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, and I'm joined, as always, by the King of Connecticut. And the purpose of the podcast tonight is to celebrate the life of UFC legend Stephan Bonnar in light of his recent passing. And King, I know you have a very lengthy and well-established friendship with Mr. Bonnar, and have some thoughts on what was an epic career in many aspects.
Sure, Jack. Well, to start off, I hope everyone had a great Christmas. So on Christmas Eve, I was with family, and my phone started blowing up. I mean, from calls to text messages to Instagram and Facebook messages, and I had to look just to see what was going on, and I got a glimpse of it, and I quickly Googled to see if this was just a fake news story, because I had just talked to Stephan a few days before, and I saw that there was nothing in the news about it that I saw on a quick glance. So I went back to my business and was with family, and then I looked back at my phone again, and I see more of these messages, and I didn't want to believe it was true. You know, it was very difficult to process on Christmas Eve. So I'll tell you, I want to clear the air on something, because there's been a lot of misinformation that's been out there, and I want to celebrate Stephan's life. He was a great guy, one of my best friends, one of my closest friends, my broadcast partner, my stand-up comedy partner. I managed him, but he actually would go out and get me more gigs with him, because he loved to do comedy with me and call fights with me. And I had booked Stephan. I had introduced him a while back to a gentleman out in Stockton, California, who was a great guy who had Inside BJJ. I had Phil Baroni living out there with him for a year with this gentleman, and he had a pro wrestling promotion. So he was booked on this pro wrestling show, and he broke his back, which was brutal. I mean, I was just talking to Dan Severn yesterday about this, and Dan and I have the same philosophy in professional wrestling. I mean, we wrestle, and we don't have a gimmick, and Stephan didn't need a gimmick. UFC Hall of Famer, and let's get this straight too. I mean, there is no way to overstate the importance of Stephan Bonnar in the Ultimate Fighting Championships in the UFC. He put UFC on the map. He and Forrest Griffin with the Ultimate Fighter reality show, and with the Ultimate Fighter finale, their fight, which still goes down in history, one of the greatest fights in history. Because prior to that, if you go here on the channel, you'll see my interview with Art Davie, who's a great friend of mine, who founded the UFC. The UFC was never on a televised product. It was a Blockbuster Video pay-per-view product. And it became televised with the advent of the Ultimate Fighter reality show. And the Ultimate Fighter finale was Stephan Bonnar, Forrest Griffin. And man, they tore the house down. During the course of that fight, the ratings kept increasing. You can watch Bonnar and I do a video about a show we did called Legends and Vixens, where we talked about that, and we talked about the ratings that they got in that match, or in that main event, and it put UFC on the map. There was a buzz. Everybody started talking about the sport. So Stephan Bonnar, amazing UFC Hall of Fame career. An amazing man. And get me back on track here, Jack. What was I talking about besides that?
You were going to clear up the misinformation regarding his
Oh,
passing.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So he broke his back. He had to go into the hospital for months, and he lost over 80 pounds in the hospital. He got a staph infection that almost killed him. And that was earlier this year. He was released, and he was never the same after that. You know, he was such a hardworking guy. And you think about it, he had this Hall of Fame career in UFC, legend, and yet he had no pension. They weren't making the big money. We'll get into Bellator because I know you've got it on your list. Number one rated fight in Bellator with him and Tito, and I'll talk about his Bonner's creative genius in that match. But he was working. He was working for the Real Water Company for quite a while. He was doing everything from sales to installation. He's such a hard worker. He was working selling insurance. He was working when he passed away. And one of the things that he was remarking was how expensive his medications and healthcare was, which is so sad that he didn't have benefits from all he gave to the sport, to the Ultimate Fighting Championships. So he died while working, and I don't like to give out personal information. It's private how someone passes away. You know, there's an old school saying, "Mind your own business. It's good for your teeth." And that saying sure as hell stands with me or any of my friends if you fucking cross me. But in this case, I felt it was important, you know, to clear the air on that.
You touched on his immense influence in UFC, but and briefly got into Bellator with your tenure as the prime marketing consultant. You had contact with Mr. Bonnar and that company as well. Can you speak more to that in addition to the Tito fight?
Man, I'm going to tell you, this speaks to Stephan's creative genius. He has a promo that he did to promote that Tito Ortiz fight is better than anything you'll see in professional wrestling. He knew how to get the emotion, how to draw the emotion out of Tito. And he did it. He brought in Justin McCulley in a mask, pro wrestling style. It got everybody talking. There was a major UFC card that was on at the time that night, and everybody was talking. Who is this guy standing next to Stephan? Stephan's in his suit, and there's this guy dressed all in black with a mask on. Who is this guy? Well, it was Tito's former trainer, Justin McCulley. And then Stephan, master of the mic, he knew he could get that emotion out of Tito, and he could get Tito to attack him and cause that melee. Tito wasn't in on it. He worked Tito. And that fight between Stephan Bonnar and Tito Ortiz that night is the only time that Bellator ever beat UFC head-to-head in the ratings. Because if you remember, you talked about when I was prime marketing consultant, that goes back to Bjorn Rebney's tenure. And it was when Spike TV had been put on the map by UFC, by guys like Stephan Bonnar and Tito Ortiz, right? They were the marquee players that had put UFC on the map. Well, now Bellator, the number 2 fight promotion in the U.S., is on Spike. UFC is on Fox Sports. And that night, they blew UFC. We blew with Bellator UFC away in the ratings head-to-head. And that speaks to the genius of Stephan Bonnar. That fight was a war, like all of Stephan's fights. It went the distance. It was a split decision that could have gone either way. Stephan was such a warrior in the cage, and that warrior spirit came out, but he was also so smooth on the mic and a creative genius, like you talked about there in Bellator MMA.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're raising that point, because those of us that have been fans of pro wrestling for decades and mixed martial arts can see clearly how MMA seemed to have developed, sort of outdid pro wrestling in terms of pro wrestling marketing and building anticipation for fights, and how personal issues draw money. And I think, would you say that would be fair to say that Mr. Bonnar would be largely responsible for turning that into a marketing strategy that's been duplicated ever since?
Jack, absolutely, because it goes back to the Ultimate Fighter reality show, season 1. That was old school pro wrestling. It was masterful, and Bonnar was the master.
Yeah, I think he deserves a heavy dose of credit for that. So moving into his broadcasting career, he was quite compelling in that regard as well, for not only UFC but Fox Sports and ESPN and WEC. Do you have any comments on his tenure behind the mic?
Oh God, are you kidding me, Jack? I mean, I had the honor of having him as my broadcast partner, and calling the UFC fights on Fox Sports and ESPN. He was so smooth. We just had Kamal Shalarus on recently, who was a big standout in WEC, who I was my training partner, and I managed throughout his career, right? And when he was in WEC, he told me it was his honor, and he told Stephan this, his honor to have Stephan call his fights, because Stephan was so smooth on the mic. We infused comedy, Stephan and I, broadcasting together. Jack Kilby, I just sent you 5 hours of footage of us calling 2 shows together in the Carolinas. And I want to know, when are you going to get those up on the Hannibal TV to honor my friend?
That's going to be part of our rollout in January, actually.
Yeah, let's make that happen, because we infused a lot of comedy. We entertained, and I learned so much from Stephan broadcasting with him. I talked to Pat Miletich on Christmas Day. He called me to offer his condolences. What a classy guy. What a great guy Pat is. And Pat and I spoke for over an hour on Christmas Day about Stephan, and he shared his stories when he broadcasted with Stephan on ESPN. And we're going to have Pat here on Old School Shooters to talk about his memories of the American Psycho as well. So he was the best, man. He was the golden voice. I learned so much from him in calling fights. And just to give you an example, I just shared this on my Facebook yesterday. I found a clip from Chael Sonnen's podcast, which is one of the top podcasts in combat sports. And I had booked Stephan to go on there. And he went on there and he put me over like gold. He put over my prowess as a broadcaster beyond what I deserve to Chael Sonnen. And he said that he and I were the dream team of combat sports broadcasting. So absolutely, he was the man, and I had the honor of learning from him. And Hannibal TV fans, you're going to have the honor of watching Stephan in action as we called the fights together. Like I say, Jack's got hours and hours of footage, and I'm very happy. That's one thing, man. There's no shortage of footage, of videos. I just shared one that we did, Stephan and I did with Lacey Von Erich, Lacey VETV. We did a comedy spot for her. Bonnar, we'll get to his comedy, man. So absolutely, brother.
Yeah, before we get into Mr. Bonner's tenure in pro wrestling and your reminiscence around that, you touched on his involvement in comedy, and I'd like to get into that first because I know you have a number of very entertaining anecdotes along those lines.
He named my boats, you know. He named my boats, brother. So Bonner was with me in 2020. In 2020, you know, if you had cash, people were just selling off luxury items that they couldn't afford anymore. So I was buying boats and jet skis and holding on to them and then going to flip them. And I get my first boat with Bonner, and we're with the guy that I'm buying it from. I got it from Facebook Marketplace, and he goes, "We shall call her the Bearded Clam," and that was his name. And then, hell, a month or so later, I bought another boat, and I called him up. He was back in Vegas, and I go, Stephan, I just bought another boat. She's right next to the Bearded Clam. What shall we call her? And without skipping a beat, he goes, "We shall call her the Salty Snatch. She is right where she needs to be, nestled next to the Bearded Clam." Yes,
So
Stephan, man, I just
very
shared a
quick.
clip. That Laurent Pinchot, who did some work for Hannibal, actually interviewed me for the Hannibal TV. I shared a clip from a show that we did, a comedy show that we did called Psychotherapy at Tilted Kilt in South Carolina. And Bonner had this joke that he wrote about gremlins that's hilarious. And it's one of many, man. He won a big stand-up tournament or big stand-up contest in Las Vegas, and he wrote all his own material, man. I call him Norm after Norm Macdonald, and he was a big fan of Norm, man. He got the same smooth, laid-back delivery as Norm. And he and I were talking about Norm, ironically, a couple of weeks ago about Norm Macdonald and talking about doing some stand-up together.
You you booked him in his first pro wrestling match, and that is, we've covered that on the Hannibal TV. Do you want to get into that as well as his tenure in total nonstop action wrestling?
Yeah, sure. Sure, man. So Bonner was out in Vegas when he and Phil Baroni had come up with the idea of doing a faction called the Real Shooters. And they were the tag team, and they wanted me to be part of the faction they were creating and be their manager for the Real Shooters. They'd been training with Glenn Gilberti, Disco Inferno out there, but they hadn't had a match yet. And I was calling the fights for House of Glory in New York City for the big New York City arena show, right? And the promoter, he told me, he goes, "I need an opponent for Matt Riddle." And I mentioned Bonner, and he goes, "Stephan Bonner?" And that's everybody's reaction, man. Bonner, like you say, the man that put UFC on the map. And I said, "Yeah, man, he's in Vegas. We want to get him do some pro wrestling." So I booked him in the match against Riddle when I was calling the action. And this is kind of a funny story too, man. So we meet up in Queens the day before, right? And we're going to hang out in New York. And the promoter put us in this barrio, man. I mean, it was a barrio. It was, everybody spoke Spanish, right? It was a nice hotel, but everybody in the hotel spoke Spanish, and everybody in the neighborhood spoke Spanish, right? So we get there, and I mean, I speak Spanish pretty fluently, you know. Mi novia is from Venezuela, está de Venezuela, so I speak Spanish pretty fluent. I've always loved Spanish women and Bonner too, but here you get this 6'4" giant, and if you ever watch Bonner walk and you hang around with him, he walked like Herman Munster, like this, walking through the streets of Queens, brother, and he stuck out like a sore thumb in that neighborhood in Queens, and we had a blast together. So we're at the hotel, man, day of the show, and Bonnar goes, this guy's not showing up, Matt Riddle, because look at the dynamic. You had the man from Ultimate Fighter that had main evented the first Ultimate Fighter finale, UFC Hall of Famer that's known for Ultimate Fighter with Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar, against Matt Riddle, who is just another contestant on a season of Ultimate Fighter. If you're Riddle, and this was way before Riddle ever was known much as a pro wrestler, if you're Riddle, you're promoting the hell out of that match, bro. And that's what Bonnar was saying. He goes, Stephan goes, this guy's not going to show. And he was just real relaxed about it. He goes, he's not showing. Right? So we did media that day. And it gets to be a few hours before the show. And what do you know? The promoter calls us and says, Riddle's backing out. He's not feeling well. Come to find out, he was promoting his show on his social media for the next day, and he wrestled on that show. So he knew he feared the psycho. So when I was calling the action, I said, and Bonnar loved this, how he got a case of the pussyitis. And that match is actually on Hannibal TV. And it's Sho Tanaka, who stepped up. I talked about it with Sonny Ono. Sho Tanaka was fantastic. They had a hell of a match. And and Bonnar, Bonnar put on one hell of a match, man. He was a great in professional wrestling, man. I had the pleasure of doing Legends and Vixens. He tricked me with his Buns of Deception, his tag team partner, Summer Steel. Oh, my. We hosted the weigh-ins the night before at Lost Gentlemen's Club. And, oh, man, and Summer got me with those lap dances at Lost, and she got me all off my game for that match. So you can watch that here on the Hannibal, too. But Bonnar was, man, so it's a promoter, Michael Caramico, that put on that show, and he used a promoter that I'd wrestled for a lot named Jay Eagle, who's out in South Carolina in the upstate. And Bonnar, man, was such a pro with Jay Eagle, man. Goes into his office, sits down, having a conversation with him. That's the thing, man. I was Bonnar's manager, but I didn't have to be his mouthpiece, man. He had the silver tongue. He was so smooth. Matter of fact, I'd been talking to him in the last few weeks about working for us with Berman Law Group and getting leads out in Vegas because he knows so many people. And sadly, that's not going to happen. But my goodness, yeah. And then TNA, he went in there and he teamed with the big football player against King Mo in the tag match there. And he loved professional wrestling, man. And he loved the indies. He said he'd already had the Hall of Fame career in UFC. He didn't want to deal with the politics of a big promotion. He just wanted to have fun doing professional wrestling. And with his name, I could get him bookings, make him some good money. And he was fantastic at it, brother.
We've got a question from the brother man who contributed $5. And he says, hello, King. Love your podcast. What's your take on Sean Strickland's comments over people trying to virtue signal over Bonnar's death? R.I.P. Bonnar.
Well, I mean, here's the deal. What has Sean Strickland ever done related to Stephan Bonnar? He doesn't know Stephan Bonnar. He's trying to be like a white knight. He's the one who's virtual signaling, trying to be like a white knight. Bonnar was not addicted to opioids, as he said. Bonnar gave him a swift kick to the head to this punk Strickland, if he ever heard him say that. He had a broken back that he was in the hospital I got an awful staph infection, and Strickland's he's just a bitch trying to get a headline.
Yeah, not really classy in light of the situation.
That's the problem today, Jack. That's the problem with all these young punks today. Like I said, mind your business. It's good for your teeth. They think they can talk and they think they can run their mouths and they think there aren't repercussions where there's still old school guys like me out there, brother.
Yeah, and to quote Hustler Rip Rogers via Bin Hameen, a lot of people think they're over, but they're not over, not even close. So that's probably
some people that think they're over need to take a trip over the bridge into the water, brother. You know who you're talking to, bro? Think about it.
Well, we've covered that a bit on this podcast about the keyboard warrior phenomenon and the lack of consequences for statements that are made electronically on social media and whatever. But that's when a man has passed, a real human being with a family and friends and etc. That's pretty uncalled for. Which brings me to another question. We've talked a bit about Mr. Bonnar's career, but you knew him on a personal level, and you made some comments to me over the past few days about what a quality human being he was, and I was wondering if you'd like to elaborate on that to whatever extent you feel appropriate.
Well, Stephan and I had been writing a book with stories of his life called Chaotic Enlightenment, and we started writing that book. Hell, I think it was back in 2017 or 18. And man, it is just full of so many great stories. And Bonnar was the kind of guy that had such an infectious personality, man. You couldn't help but have fun around him. And there's one story that I can tell. I can tell you a personal story where he may have saved the life of a girl that I was with at the time. Bonnar at one point it had a woman that was kind of obsessed with him, and he wanted to break it off. He didn't, and I ended up seeing her for a little bit, and then found out she was a little wacky, and she said what a lot of people say, which is, she threatened to kill herself, and he didn't take it seriously. Well, she actually did kill herself. She blew her brains out. And that story actually is in the book we were writing, and it's one of the life lessons. So when I was with a young lady that expressed to me the same thing, and I wasn't taking it seriously, it started to hurt my chest, my heart a little bit. So I called Stephan, and I talked to him, and he knew her, and he said, "You got to get to her house right away. Got to get to her house right away." And I won't get into the circumstances, but he may have saved her life, in that case. And that's what kind of guy he was. He was a great guy. Everybody loved him. In this book, Chaotic Enlightenment, he was a wild man. He was a fun guy to be around. You see some of the stories, not even knowing, obviously, that he was going to pass. And this awful news, I didn't even want to do this old school shooters show with you originally as more than just a first. I had an idea, let's just do like an episode called Old School Shooters. We did it with Colin Crandall, right? And then you were talking about doing it as a regular show with guys that telling stories, sitting back here on the rocking chair telling stories. And I had already done that with a podcast with the same people we're having on here with my Gold Kings Court podcast. And I had first told you no, and then I thought about it, and I said, yeah, you know what, let's do it. And everything happens for a reason, because I've been telling stories about Stephan Bonnar before he passed with Jerry Briscoe, with Sonny Ono, and you guys have been sharing those because he was such an important part of my life. And I had recently got him and Forrest Griffin together to do a commercial for Shoot Pro Wrestling, which fans who listen to Old School Shooters know about. And they did a phenomenal commercial. But I've been talking about, I'm doing the creative development create business development for Shoot Pro Wrestling. And Bonner and I have been talking, and he was supposed to be out at the show. We were planning this angle at the next show that was going to be really cool, and he was excited about it. And we're gonna move on with Shoot Pro Wrestling in his honor, because he was a big part of the creative stuff that was supposed to be coming up. And with this book, man, it's overwhelming to me. You know, I've had close family and friends pass this year, and I never post about private information, but this isn't private. Stephan Bonnar is public. I mean, he is the man. He's the man who put UFC on the map. And this is for the fans that I want to tell these stories. And I want to get people to know what a great guy he was, and not a lot of these mealy mouth punks that are trying to get a headline talking about him that didn't even know him.
And speaking of bringing information to the fans, this initial podcast in honor of Mr. Bonnar is the first of a few that we're going to do on the Old School Shooters format. We're going to be welcoming in the days to come, depending, schedule to be determined given the time of year, but we're going to welcome back Pat Miletich, who appeared before on the show, was an excellent guest. Mark Coleman, who a lot of fans will be interested in his take, as well as
Mark Coleman had a great fight. His fight with Bonnar that went the distance. What a fight that was. And Mark Coleman, a fellow UFC Hall of Famer, the godfather of ground and pound, man.
Yeah, looking forward to that for sure. And then tomorrow with
Neil Melanson. Yeah, Neil's going to come on tomorrow, and grapplers and fighters will know Neil. Neil's a great guy, man. He's a legend as a coach and a trainer, and really looking forward to hearing. And he kept in contact with Stephan. He trained with Stephan, and they were friends as well.
So I think this is going to be an interesting series for fans, but not only that, but to set, as you said, the record straight and discuss who Mr. Bonnar was as a person and a professional, from yourself, who they're who's eminently qualified to speak on the subject. And the Hannibal TV viewers are well aware of Mr. Bonnar and his career and the work that he did with Hannibal, and like to send out our personal heartfelt condolences to Mr. Bonnar's family on his loss.
And his son Griffin, who was named after Forrest Griffin, he had his obviously most famous fight with. And they were great friends too. You know, I talked to Forrest through text on Christmas Day as well. And I don't know if he's going to come on. And folks that have told me that they're going to come on, I know everybody has busy schedules. I never want to speak for anybody. They've said that they're going to come on, and it's up to them. I mean, everybody has their own message and is free to speak and share. And for me, it's very rare that I do something like this, because I keep my private information very private, and I don't talk about folks that have passed, even close family members. But in this case, it's so much different, and it was really bothering me when I was seeing a few of the things that were out there about my dear friend that were erroneous, and wanted to really just celebrate his life.
Well, again, it's not going to overshadow the legacy that he leaves behind, and we're going to delve into that more in the days, et cetera, to come. But before we end this particular chapter, King, I believe you have a quote that you felt was very appropriate for the circumstances that you'd like to end our discussion on for today, anyway.
Yeah, just wanted to say that, if you touch people's lives, you coach people, you train people, you give the fans the memories, you have this great legacy you never truly die. And beyond that, Bonner and I have, and you'll see when you read the Chaotic Enlightenment book, we're very spiritual guys, and I want to share something with you. Whenever anyone close to me has passed, I believe strongly in the spirits, and they visit me in my dreams, and it's very vivid. And I'm going to tell you this: on Christmas morning, it was around 5 a.m. I had a very strong conversation with Stephan. He was tired. He was weak, and this is what he said to me. He said, "Do you know the lineage of Saint Patrick?" And I said, "Is that a movie?" And he said, "No." He said, "Do you know what I'm talking about?" He said, "Do you know the lineage of Saint Patrick?" And then I woke up from this vivid conversation in my dream. And I woke up to use the restroom, and I said, "Man, I gotta write this down, because I'm gonna forget it. Because sometimes, you go back to sleep and you forget the conversation." So I texted it to myself to look at it on Christmas Day. So one of the first things that I did, I was with family Christmas Day. I had to wait until I could get a little alone time, and I started to research the lineage of St. Patrick. And I didn't know anything about this, but St. Patrick was actually living in England when he was kidnapped by Irish bandits and brought to Ireland. And he was tortured for years in Ireland. And that's where he found God. And he was of Roman descent. He wasn't Irish. And yet, I thought about it because it took a while for this to register to me. St. Patrick's Day is the big Irish holiday. So I started thinking, what does that mean? That message mean? And I came up with the answer is things are not what they appear. And I'll leave you with that. And that's what I got out of that. Very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Well, King, we've come to the end of this particular episode, but fans will be back tomorrow with Neil at 1 p.m. And I think it's important to, as you touched on, King, with all the hyperbole and misinformation out there, to put out real actual facts about the man and his life in order to honor him appropriately, because as you said, he is the man who put UFC on the map.
Yeah, and I want to celebrate his life, and I want to end with a quote from Billy Joel: "Only the good die young." And I'll have a toast. Stephan's favorite beverage, as you heard in the story that I told to Jerry Briscoe recently before his passing, Jack Daniels. I'll take a swig in his honor. R.I.P. Rest in power, American Psycho.
See you tomorrow, fans, live.